workshop, I've learned a lot. I'm very new at thinking about the attention economy in any kind of focused way. So this is kind of a jump to my understanding of it. So I think the reason we're thinking about these two subjects together, meditation, Buddhism, and the attention economy, is because there's some hope that Buddhist cultivation of attention and Buddhist modes of contemplative practices might be of some help in this matter. And we know too that these practices have really exploded, or at least Buddhist derived practices have really exploded on the scene in the West, particularly in America, but now globally, all over the place, people are practicing mindfulness, and this is derived from Buddhism. And these contemplative practices have begun to be used as a kind of digital discipline, or as techniques for fostering a more intentional approach to our attention and digital consumption as ways of unplugging from our devices, or getting more in touch with the natural flow of thoughts and feelings. And again, mindfulness is sort of a big part of this. And it's interesting too that mindfulness has just become ubiquitous, especially if you think about it in its historical context. These practices were invented by radical countercultural recluses who left behind their families, their status, their social status, their money, and went off to the forest to do something really weird, which is look within your own mind and try to find some kind of heightened sense of reality through that. And if we think about that, those practices sort of tracing their way down to the current moment, when now these practices derived from that are used for helping us be more efficient at work, or mindfulness for better horseback riding, or better sex, or anything, you can better golf. It's easy to sort of poo-poo that, but we've always had sort of popular forms of Buddhism, so I'll withhold judgment on that for now. So the point is, it's really gone from being something very specialized, even within the Buddhist communities. It was not meditation is not really a widespread thing among ordinary Buddhists. To now having this kind of mass meditation movement, and to the point where it's completely mainstream in the West. I say in the book that when I first started to get into meditation, it was this really kind of niche thing that beat poets and avant-garde artists and musicians were doing, and that was really cool. And now it's like something that your doctor recommends along with eating your vegetables and exercising. So very mainstream. But I want to offer a somewhat different interpretation of mindfulness and meditation than the one that has become common, and the way of talking about it that's become common, and then ask about what implications there might be for the attention economy. So I'm sort of learning how to use the yeah, all right. So one of the standard definitions that really has become powerful, because it's the one that scientific researchers often use when they stick monks into MRI machines and hook them up and so on. John, here's the first one is a little bit more clinical definition, but John Kabat-Zinn is sort of the one who pioneered this: the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally to the unfolding experience moment by moment. So this non-judgmental and the present-centered is really key to this reconfigured mindfulness practice. And it's really become widespread in Buddhist communities as well as sort of secular mindfulness communities. And in that sense, and again, since it's become very powerful in the research, it's really become sort of normative in the standard version of mindfulness. And again, I want to say as a practice, I think it's a fine thing. I've recommended it to people who I thought would benefit from it, and I think it has done good. It seems to be something that can help some health benefits and so on. And its advantage is because it's so stripped of all, very consciously stripped of all Buddhist terminology and ethical context and so on, that it's very portable. It can be, taken into the corporation, or it can be taken into the health club or the therapist's office, and it can do whatever it's going to do in those contexts. The disadvantage is that it's so stripped down that it's bereft of, because it no longer has the kind of conceptual and ethical apparatus that it would in a traditional Buddhist context, then it sort of arrives in these various other contexts like a kind of dry sponge that just immediately absorbs whatever kind of values and ideas are hanging out in the ether. And so it just becomes a way of it might become a way of just kind of replicating the normative dominant values of whatever cultural context it happens to be in. So I'd like to offer kind of an alternative way of thinking about mindfulness and meditation practices. And I go too far. So first, the assumptions in the kind of standard model of mindfulness, I think, have absorbed a lot of kind of Western individualism. And while it's derived from Buddhism, it's also sort of modeled on contemporary or modern scientific objectivity. The individual subject in this model has a clear, privileged, and private view to the interior contents of consciousness. And the idea that the most accurate access to things is brought about through disengaged observation, quelling the emotions, and the neutralization of any particular social and cultural perspective, in order that a kind of disengaged, independent subject may encounter things from a presuppositionless neutrality. And so in that sense, it's crafted to resemble the kind of neutrality to which the scientific secular gaze rooted in the Enlightenment epistemology aspires, the kind of non-judgmental, non-emotional observation, free of religion, free especially of superstition, free of bias, and so on. And again, that's not completely different from some Buddhist models too. There are some overlaps, but I think it's absorbed a lot of that, again, the kind of Western epistemological stance. So a step towards an alternative view, I'm going to let Evan Thompson make the first move in that, rather than seeing mindfulness as he himself, when he wrote his book with Francisco Varela, saw it as a kind of privileged and highly focused special kind of internal observation of raw epistemic kind of information from within. That is a kind of raw stream of data that is in the mind. He sees it now more as an integrated exercise of a host of cognitive, affective, and bodily skills in situated action. He's coming at it from very much the embodied cognition perspective. And in this sense, meditative practices, rather than simply discovering a pre-existent internal reality akin to the objects of scientific investigation, rather, it creates new ways of constituting oneself in the world, new relationships between the world and oneself. And these meditation practices might be viewed as technologies of self-cultivation or practices of self-transformation that aim at creating particular ways of being in the world. Or we might say being in a world, because I want to get down into a more culturally embedded understanding of mindfulness, in the sense that, again, it's a step away from the move of seeing mindfulness as just sort of observing this interior bubble of consciousness, to a species of embodied, inactive social and cultural activity. And I make use in the book of this concept of the social imaginary, which is a term that is widely used today among social theorists and philosophers and so on, but it might be worth unpacking a little bit. My interpretation of it, drawn primarily from Charles Taylor, is that it's a sort of nested group of contexts. That is the immediate context. So if we imagine somebody doing meditation, the immediate context might be the explicit ideas that inform what one is doing in a particular practice, why one does it, the particular philosophical and religious doctrines, the values that are inherent in it, the ethical context, what constitutes success or failure or progress. But all that takes place against the background of a kind of repertoire of concepts, attitudes, social practices, customs, a kind of what's not really explicit, but what's really just implicit in the social imaginary, things that are taken for granted, one's default intuitions. And that often doesn't really show up as something explicit in the practices, but it seeps in a way unconsciously. And then on top of that, we also have social and political structures of authority, various ways of dividing up people in a democracy, in a caste system, wealth, poverty, who gets to do what. And then I would even extend it to a cosmological context, that is, how it feels to live in a world, let's say, of rebirth, where all living beings are intertwined in this cycle of samsara, versus, living in a world in which we're a kind of accident of nature, and we live in this vast universe that doesn't seem to have any particular purpose related to us, or various other cosmologies that might impact one's experience of meditating. And so this social imaginary then is sort of our both explicit and implicit being in that world, in that particular cultural world, and how we imagine how things are, and also our relations with each other. It's a sort of development of the concept of the life world. So given that, contemplative experiences and practices that strive to produce certain experiences and cultivate certain ways of being in the world, a world that contains particular normative understandings of the good life, of a holy life, of a life that's worth living, a successful life, as well as conceptions of the person, mind, its features, and so on. What meditation will do at different stages of the path, and there are lots of maps of these paths in different Buddhist traditions. We've heard from some this morning. Different levels of meditation that you can get into, different sort of levels of people as they ascend various states of consciousness and being, and so on. And what I want to suggest is that these are not just private states, but that there's a kind of experience negotiation that's always going on between a practitioner and her teacher, perhaps, the texts that the practitioner has read, the larger context and the social imaginary as a whole. So again, there are in the say an early Buddhist example, the tradition supplies a kind of view of the human being, of the moral and attitudinal values that are they're valuing different phenomena, the body, sexuality, sense objects. How do we approach those? What kind of valuation do we give them? And various, usually there's an overarching taxonomy in which there are certain categories of experience that one is expected to strive for, certain others that you want to get rid of. There's a lot of sort of nudging one toward certain experiences and nudging one away from certain other experiences. There's a understanding of what's important to pay attention to as one is meditating, and what might just not really be important, or what might not even be on the particular taxonomy of this particular tradition. And so meditation in this sense is not a private empirical observation of mental contents, but a dialogical process in systemic relation to the tradition broader culture, its categories and ideals. And this these taxonomies and this, this broader context, again, provides much of the understanding of what meditation is doing. So in this sense, I think often the practices as they're being studied, for instance, in the scientific community today, the question is, well, how do these meditation practices work? And usually that question is implicitly a universalistic question. That is, how does it work? Well, does it lower cortisol, or does it lower your blood pressure, or increase serotonin, or things like that? And all those are important questions. But the question I'm asking shifts that a little bit, and that is, what kind of work does meditation do in a particular social cultural context? And that might be very, very different in one context versus the other. If we imagine, for instance, a lay practitioner, a middle-class professional woman, business person, married, meditation for her may be something that helps her negotiate relations with her coworkers a little bit more smoothly. It may enhance her family life in various ways. It may help her appreciate music and the theater and things like that. And she doesn't have any kind of sense of, any supernatural realities, or she might, but let's just say she doesn't. And she basically has modern science as her sort of default understanding of things, and little room for superstition or supernatural miracles or heavens or hells or things like that. Now, if we contrast that with, say, a first century Indian monk, which this is not. This is actually a 21st century Sri Lankan monk, but we'll just have to pretend. So for somebody like this, he's part, again, of a radical countercultural movement. He's left behind his family. He's left behind his possessions. He is, his texts are telling him to really resist these temptations to be lured back to the love of one's brothers and sisters and family. And he needs to maintain his celibacy. He needs to not worry about his social status. And so, I mean, this is maybe a little bit of an idealized picture of it. We've all, any of us who have spent any time with actual monks know that they're real human beings and they have various things. But this is the kind of normative ideal that, that this is, you're really kind of focused on one thing, and this is the meditative practice. And he might eat mindfully, like the businesswoman, but the businesswoman is eating mindfully to appreciate the nuances and flavors of the food. He's eating mindfully to sort of detach from the flavors and to, sort of try and disengage any kind of emotional engagement with his food. And he's in a completely different, broader cultural and social imaginary. In other words, he's living in a world of rebirth. He's hoping that he might transcend the embodied life entirely in nirvana, or if not, at least not get sucked into the realms of hells or the hungry ghosts, or be reborn as an animal or anything like that. So now, I say this not to say that one of these is really the way we should be doing it and the other is really bad. I'm just sort of illustrating how these two people doing essentially maybe the same practices, maybe not quite, but it's entirely conceivable that they could be focusing mainly on sort of breath meditation. Maybe if we could somehow magically put them both in an MRI machine, their brains might look really similar, or maybe the same kind of activities, but they're in very different social imaginaries, and therefore the work that their meditation is doing is very different. The kinds of being in the world that they're cultivating is very different. Now, what I don't think, well, I'm not going to go into this. This is cosmologies, and here are the realms of rebirth that you can be reborn in: the heaven realm, and the human realm, and the hell realm, which is just like a good old-fashioned Dante-esque place where you can get burned and poked and frozen. Animals, hungry ghosts, which have really giant bellies and tiny, tiny thin necks, and so all of that. So this is a reality for many people throughout the centuries. So what I think this doesn't mean, again, I'm just illustrating how meditation is embedded within these ideas and implicit understandings of things, and that makes a difference in terms of the work that meditation does. So I think that doesn't mean that we are trapped in our social imaginaries, and that meditation merely reproduces the experiences that are kind of prefigured by those social imaginaries. To the contrary, I think often meditation might well disrupt dominant taxonomies, it might help create new ones. So certain features of contemplative practices really do seem to produce novel experiences that sort of jump people out of their particular social imaginaries, and then they might develop a kind of new school of meditation or a new school of Buddhism, and create a new taxonomy. So novelty happens, and individuals find themselves in states that are not prefigured by normative ways of being. And also social imaginaries are constantly changing and merging with each other and borrowing from each other. So these things shouldn't be seen as fixed. And also, I'm not going to say that there are no cross-cultural experiences. Again, that sort of follows. People might well have experiences that overlap considerably between different traditions. So now, I know a couple of things about Buddhism, but I don't know much about the attention economy right now. But this is my first sort of initial shot at how we might think of meditation in addressing the attention economy. So the first is at the level, probably the one that just occurs to us naturally, at the level of individual practice. That is wresting attention from the pull of impulse towards skillful, intentional action. And I'm thinking, if we want to use Buddhist categories, I would think of the distinction between craving or just impulsiveness and right intention or skillful intention, a part of the Eightfold Path. Maybe we could think of it in terms of slow and fast thinking as well. That is cultivating the personal discipline necessary to maintain some integrity in the face of the onslaught of attentional affordances that we're living in at the moment. And then, the second one, I think we could see meditation practices, at least in some cases, as part of skeptically interrogating the realities that seem most natural and easily apparent to us, and fostering the creation of new realities or new understandings of reality. In ancient India, this, of course, was what was happening. There was a whole alternative kind of countercultural movement that Buddhism was in the beginning that really separated itself from the mainstream normative traditions at the time and set up something completely new. And in this sense, in our world, in our social imaginary, I think this can still sort of include the inquiry, the skeptical inquiry into the realities and values that are constantly sort of constructed for us by corporations trying to harness our attention for their profit, and by our impulsively and unreflectively sort of bounding towards the infinite attentional affordances that are held out to us. So much that they really seem to threaten our freedom and scatter attention into this explosion of half-realized possibilities and create this rather jittery sense of distraction that seems to be the norm today. So that's the second indication of what might be a possibility. The other is, again, part of a critique of the broader systemic factors shaping the attention economy. That is, I guess I'm thinking about the fact that Buddhist meditation always sort of was packaged with a worldview, with certain concepts, with certain ethical values, and was always, I think, an integral part of rethinking those values and interrogating those values. So I think probably if Buddhist meditation is really to have an effect on a positive effect on our problems with the attention economy, it will have to go beyond just a kind of passive relaxation to turn the mind off, and be a part of also have modes that are a part of a more critical thought, and that there is a long tradition of that in Buddhism as well. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Are there any clarifying questions? Very briefly, this.
I'm sorry, I think I took a little too long.
No, it's my responsibility. I had a hard time stopping you. We're clear. Okay. Is that okay, David? That we move on to Jin?
Okay. Should I get out of that?